Hi, everyone. Welcome to PPAN's July webinar. That's all about the bug that's been on your mind this month, grasshoppers. Thank you so much for joining us for Pollinators Meet Grasshopper and Mormon Cricket Management. I also want to thank our incredible speakers for today, Sharon Selvaggio and Lee Murphy. My name is Anna Gray Anderson, and I am the Community Engagement Manager for People and Pollinators Action Network, or PPAN for short. We've been thinking a lot about the issues farmers and gardeners faced with grasshoppers last year, and we're hoping that this is just the beginning of the grasshopper conversation, and that this webinar will be a good jumping off point for how to move forward. For those of you who aren't familiar with our webinar series, we usually host a monthly event, so be sure to sign up for our e-news and check out our events calendar to keep up to date with all of our upcoming events. And we can put these links in the chat for you. And then before we get started, we just wanted to tell you a little bit more about us. So we are People and Pollinators Action Network, or PPAN, the host of this webinar. We focus a lot on making Colorado a safe haven for all who live here, from people to pollinators. And we do this through grassroots advocacy, education, and outreach, kind of like this webinar. We also do a lot of policy, community mobilization, and habitat creation work. A good example of that would be our Protect Our Pollinators Habitat Fund, which is a small grants program based on the sales of the pollinator license plate. And that goes towards creating pollinator safe spaces while promoting community mobilization. And I did just want to emphasize the significance of that Protect Pollinators license plate. PPAN championed the legislation that created this plate, and the majority of the donations for the plate go directly to that habitat fund. So by getting a plate, you'll be contributing directly to getting more native plants in the ground, which leads to more pollinators. And we will also put a link in the chat for this. So we're really grateful to have speaker Sharon Selvaggio here today. Sharon is a pesticide reduction specialist with the Xerces Society, a conservation organization working to protect the natural world through the conservation of invertebrates. Sharon leads Xerces' work in seeking sustainable solutions for grasshopper and Mormon cricket management, especially on public lands. Sharon spent 27 years with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and U.S. Forest Service, working as a wildlife biologist, conservation planner, and refuge manager. She also received her MS in Energy and Resources and BA in Biology, both from the University of California. We're also super excited to have Lee Murphy joining us today. Lee is a master's student in the Yale School of the Environment, focusing on the social and ecological dynamics of insect-human interactions. She is currently working on a project about Mormon crickets in the Intermountain West. She holds a BA degree in biology and geology from Harvard University. And before we get started, and as a reminder, please stay muted. Leave your questions in the chat, and we will keep track of those and get to as many of them as we can at the end of both presentations. We are recording this, so it will be posted to our YouTube channel soon, and we will be able to share some of the slides from the speakers as well. We also encourage you to make a donation today so that PPAN can continue to host this free webinar series and to support PPAN's education, advocacy, and habitat creation efforts. A donation of any size really does make a difference, so thank you for your consideration. Another way to support this work is by getting that beautiful pollinator license plate. And again, we will put these links in the chat to make it easy. And with that, I will stop sharing and pass it off to Sharon. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anna Gray. To reintroduce myself, I'm Sharon Selvaggio. I'm a pesticide reduction specialist with the Xerces Society. We're the largest invertebrate conservation society in the world. And we really notice and try to help people recognize that we all depend upon invertebrates. That this is the life that sustains us. We wouldn't be here without them. So with that, I'm hoping to talk a little bit about grasshopper management and really take you on a journey today to think a little bit about these interesting animals and the role that they play in our ecosystems. But let's start out looking at our experience with grasshoppers after settlement in the West. Basically, when pioneers moved into the West, they started having troubles almost immediately. And some of you may be familiar with that. This was a common saying, they ate everything but the mortgage. And so, this is no surprise really that our own historical experience here in America has left this residue of fear. And you may have read books like Little House on the Prairie when I was a little kid that basically described the biggest grasshopper outbreak. It was actually a locust species, which, believe it or not, is now extinct. But at that time, it was measured at, I don't have my notes in front of me, but I think it was 110 miles wide, 1,800 miles long, and a half mile in depth. This was absolutely enormous. And you can imagine the fear that it caused. We also have our, history going all the way back to the Bible, talking about grasshoppers as a plague. So this is sort of some of our internal sort of psychic stuff that we've inherited. And we know that grasshoppers still cause a lot of problems for producers. They can cause problems for gardeners. So we're going to talk about that too. But I want to talk to you a little bit more today about some of the ecological value. And first, let's look at a few fun facts about this group of insects, grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. They're ancient. They evolved even before birds did, hundreds of millions of years ago. And have you tried doing a long jump lately? They can jump 20 times their body length. For me, that would be jumping 100 feet. No, not happening. They make sound, and their ears are not on their heads. They're sound hearing organs. They are on their legs or on their abdomens. And they make this sound to attract mates. And we can't even hear all of their sounds because sometimes they're just at a frequency that we can't hear. They are actually dominant herbivores in grassland ecosystems around the world. This is a really key fact for understanding how to really look more deeply at these insects, not just as pests, but as critical components of ecosystems and grasslands. Now, some of them undergo these really bizarre and really interesting phase changes. They kind of turn back and forth over the years between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They can go from being not a problem, they're living alone, and then they get into these huge swarms and they can change colors. This is really common with locusts, but not so common with other insects. What's interesting about this, I think, is not only that it means that, like an outbreak is starting to occur, but that this trait actually evolved independently with different species around the world, which is pretty incredible. Here's another fun fact that I just find absolutely amazing, which is that a biologist who calculated this, but you know how abundant bison were in the American West at the time of colonization. Well, one species of grasshopper, the Rocky Mountain locust, its biomass was almost as huge, estimated at about 80% of the biomass of bison. So that's all I'll say about fun facts. Lee is going to talk more about Mormon crickets after I'm done, and that is another fascinating animal, and she'll talk a lot about that. So one thing to know is that outbreaks, which are defined as a number of grasshoppers or crickets per square yard, they're really episodic. They can move around the landscape and they change from year to year. So on the left, I just show between 1963 and 1992 where grasshopper outbreaks were occurring, and you can see how different they are between years. In Colorado last year, you all had an outbreak, and I know that some places in Colorado are struggling with high levels this year as well. But those red dots show where grasshoppers were more than 8 per square yard. The USDA APHIS, which is a federal agency, they oversee the federal grasshopper and cricket suppression program, and that is a program that focuses on monitoring grasshopper populations and treating them on federal lands, and they can also treat tribal, state, and private lands, but it's mostly on federal and private lands and tribal lands. But there's also states and local governments and private actors that can organize their own suppression efforts. Sorry, I'm just noticing that I have to plug in my computer, otherwise I'm going to go dead here. All right, should have checked that. But so those private efforts can be pretty big. Like every year, Idaho hands out carbaryl bait to landowners in different parts of the state. Last year, there was a very large private spray that was organized in South Dakota and Wyoming. The Weed and Pest District might organize sprays. So these kinds of efforts occur at a number of different levels. Um, Now, APHIS requires monitoring before a spray occurs or an application. Some of these other entities may not require monitoring, so that knowing that the insecticide is going on only where grasshopper populations are actually high. So this is something to know about. Also, some areas are more prone than other areas. And this is a map of Wyoming looking at 33 years of outbreak history. And the black areas where grasshoppers were reaching high levels more frequently than anywhere else. So this is also something to know because it helps for planning. And it also helps to recognize that not every area in the West is prone to outbreak. Now, does grasshopper suppression have a downside? Is it really good that we're trying to get rid of these pesky insects? I mean, it can be, but let me talk a little bit about some of the values that grasshoppers provide and the fact that, or that, really the desirability of thinking about this. So first, grasshoppers can actually increase rangeland productivity. This is especially true in arid areas where they can actually speed up the decomposition of vegetation matter by consuming this dry, arid vegetation and then pooping it out as frass, and then that breaks down more quickly. And some researchers even say this, that grasshopper ecosystem functioning depends upon the presence of grasshoppers and their abundance. So this is something to consider. We have a lot of pollinators in the West. We have the biggest pollinator hotspots in the country are located in the Southwest, where you can see the red area on the map here. And that includes like Utah and even parts of Colorado are also some very high hotspot areas. Colorado is actually the fifth highest bee diversity state in the country, and Colorado contains a third of all the resident butterflies. So pollinators are out there, and when we spray native or natural landscapes, they're going to be in the way. There's some red flags that we at Xerces sort of consider when we think about pesticide risks to pollinators. First, is there widespread use of this pesticide, or is the pesticide going to move off site easily? This is more common if you have aerial sprays, for instance. Is there a high likelihood of exposure? Is the pesticide being sprayed at a time and over a habitat where bees are likely to be active? Is the pesticide toxic? How high is the toxicity? How broad? And how slow does a pesticide break down? Is it persistent? So these are some of the red flags that we examine. So in looking at these programs, and I'm going to focus on the APHIS program, there are a lot of sprays over natural areas. This is a map of areas that were planned for spray and in many cases occurred between 2008 and 2024. And you can see the concentration of them in certain parts of the country, especially Montana and Wyoming. On average, APHIS says it sprays about 500,000 acres per year, but sometimes this is actually running into the millions of acres per year. Sometimes the blocks are really huge, even at 500 square miles. They occur in the summertime when bees are out, and these are mostly aerial sprays. So we see the potential for exposure, we see the potential for non-target, for movement off-site, and so on. Sometimes these sprays are really enormous. Like in 2021, Montana, within Montana, APHIS planned treatment over a footprint of 2.6 million acres. A lot of those were concentrated in two counties on the southeast corner of Montana. And sometimes they're in sensitive areas. We've seen that APHIS does spray sometimes in wilderness study areas, areas that are designated areas of critical ecological concern, sometimes even national wildlife refuges. So these are some areas that are sensitive that are getting sprayed. There are 4 authorized active ingredients. I'm just putting up here 3 of them because one of them is almost never used anymore. And so on this slide, what I want to draw your attention to is toxicity and persistence. So we see that like diflubenzuron, it impedes molting and egg hatch, which means that it basically prevents reproduction. And for bumblebees, it can suppress reproduction even at very low concentrations. And it's quite persistent. It sticks around for weeks. Carbaryl is a really broad scale pesticide that's been around for a long time. It's considered highly toxic to most insects, also a likely human carcinogen. Chlorantraniliprole is new. It's on the list that can be used. It hasn't been used yet to my knowledge, but it's very persistent. This is something that really distinguishes this pesticide. And it is, exceptionally effective at killing butterflies and moths in the caterpillar stage. It also is known to suppress bumblebee reproduction. So those are those red flags on toxicity and persistence, which are raised with these chemicals. So when you think about it, how are native bees exposed when they're out there flying around and a spray occurs? Well, first of all, these native bees are out there flying around because they're collecting food for themselves and they're also collecting food for their nests. Essentially, most native bees are, collecting the food prior to laying their eggs. So they're collecting the pollen, they roll it into a little ball, they lay it in, they put it in the nest, and they lay an egg on it. And that egg, when it hatches, it starts eating that pollen ball. So if the pollen is contaminated, it's going to go into the nest. The larva, which is a sensitive stage, is going to start consuming it. Some bees, leafcutter bees, also collect leaf material for their nests. And if they bring that back to the nest, there's some contact potential exposure. And then the adult bees themselves could be contacted by the sprays and can be consuming the nectar when they are out there foraging around. We know that adult bees can actually absorb diflubenzuron through their exoskeleton, and this can move in the case of a queen that's foraging to their eggs. So this is a concern because if they've got the chemical in their eggs, it may impede the egg hatch altogether. Last year, the Agricultural Research Service sampled some flowers. They did a pretty good little study. It's not published yet, and they sampled before and after an aphis spray, and they found that in sprayed areas, the average concentration of diflubenzuron was near levels that what we know from lab studies can cause 50% drop in reproductive output. So this gives us some pretty big concern about this may be affecting some of our native bees. In Colorado and neighboring states, we have quite a number of at-risk bumblebees, several of which have been petitioned for listing. This shows a few of them. And these pesticides are also an additional risk for butterfly populations, which some of them in Colorado are pretty stressed already. And across the United States, there are many butterfly populations that are quite stressed. And by stress, I mean their populations have declined substantially within the last 20 years. There's a recent study that's looked at about half the butterflies in the US. They had enough data, the species they had enough data to look at. And they found that in Colorado, you can see the mourning cloak and the great spangled fritillary have declined by substantial percentages. And across the US, almost half the bees have dropped by half in terms of population. So we're really seeing an issue with our butterfly populations. And some of the species, about 10%, have suffered more than a 90% population loss in 20 years. So when you look at pesticides in landscapes that have these species still hanging on and they get this additional stressor, it's a problem. Let's look a little bit at the dependence of other animals on grasshoppers and Mormon crickets. One thing to remember is that the overwhelming majority of grasshoppers that are out there are not pests. While pest species can outbreak and they can rise to high numbers, there's still a lot of other grasshoppers that are out there. They're not the target of these sprays, but usually you've got a complex of different species coexisting in any area. So we're hitting the non-pest insects and the pest insects. Sometimes those non-pest insects compete with the pest insects. So this is sort of a non-target effect that we really need to think about. In addition, a lot of grassland birds, I mean, I could show you lists and lists and lists of birds that prey on grasshoppers, but just selecting some of these sort of like little brown job songbirds that exist in rangelands, they rely really heavily on grasshoppers, some of these species, up to 60, 70% of their diet or nestling food, hundreds of insects a day in some cases. So these are the sort of like little worker birds out there that are constantly consuming grasshoppers. And we rely on these birds as just background predators, keeping the populations regulated. So when the grasshoppers are suppressed and they may switch to different, insects as food, but some of those other insects are also affected by these sprays. And a lot of those grassland birds are also declining in population for a lot of different reasons. There are not just these little brown job, passerines that are out there preying on grasshoppers, but we've also got big birds like gulls and raptors that can be really important predators. They can be opportunistic on grasshoppers. And the knowledge of this goes all the way back to the Mormon settlement. You can see that quote up there by Mormon pioneer Orson Whitney, who talked about the gulls coming in and basically taking care of the outbreak that was devastating those early Mormon settlers. There's some numbers in here from studies about how many grasshoppers can be in one gull, 535 in the digestive tract of one California gull in Alberta, and all kinds of others in Franklin gulls. So these are really important aids to our grasshopper suppression efforts. So when we think about management, we need to take into account and think about conserving these birds and the role that they play as well. Birds are not the only ones. Fish, like at the Dinosaur National Monument, endangered fish, they also eat Mormon crickets. And other fish eat other grasshoppers. And then there's a whole bunch of insect predators like spiders and blister beetles and wasps, which can be parasitoids of grasshopper eggs and flies. All of these different kinds of insects that are native to these ecosystems as well, they rely on grasshoppers and they can actually help take care of these grasshopper populations, but they're also susceptible to the pesticides that are being used. There's studies that have shown the effects on these non-target insects. Some of these studies looked at short-term effects only. One study looked at a longer-term effect, and we see effects on ants and beetles and bees and wasps and flies and spiders. And so we see that there's effects from these pesticides to a variety of other insects. I know I'm going through these quickly because I really want to have enough time for Lee. And I think you're going to find her presentation fascinating. So I just have a couple more slides. But if you have missed stuff, because I'm going through these quickly, I think this will be recorded. You can go back and look at it again, and I'm happy to show my PDF afterwards too. So maybe you've got a garden, maybe you've got a small farm. What can you do if you've got grasshoppers coming in and eating your vegetables, eating your flowers, maybe eating your crop if you've got a small farm? Well, there's a lot of other things that you can do before using pesticides, and certainly should be used first. We usually group these into different lumps, so different categories. First of all, try to make the environment not so conducive. So think about what you're planting. There's certain vegetable crops that are not as susceptible, and those would include squash, garlic, aromatic herbs, tomatoes sometimes. You can also utilize the susceptible plants as trap plants if you're going to use like a bait. You can, or even a spray that's as least toxic as possible. You can plant these around your garden, let the grasshoppers concentrate in them, and just spray those areas or bait those areas. You can get rid of weeds. So these are things that you can do to help make the site less susceptible. You can also protect your plants by using netting or chicken wire. You can pick them off of your plants when their temperatures are cool and they're less likely to be flying around. Drop them into a bucket of soapy water, or some people snip them in half or do other gruesome things to basically take care of them. Biological methods can be really successful. Some people are using chickens and turkeys or guinea fowl pretty successfully. There's a garden design called a chicken moat where it takes some construction, and if you've got the resources for that, you basically fence in your garden, and you have a like chickens running along the outside. And so you're preventing grasshoppers from coming in, but those that do come in, your chickens are able to get them. You can add bird boxes and feeders. You can also diversify your plantings, and this will help attract natural enemies. I have a hypothesis, and I'm really wondering what you in Colorado think about this and what your experience has been. But my hypothesis is that drought-tolerant native plants might be more resilient. For those of you that are seeing plants in your garden being eaten, is this true? I'd like to hear about that, like in the question and answer section. So we've been, basically making our voices heard and asking for these reforms, and we invite you to help us ask for these. First of all, we ask for sustainable solutions. A lot of these sprays occur over rangelands and sometimes over croplands, these big sprays. We'd like to see management practices by the BLM that APHIS also pushes for that help these grasslands be more resilient and less conducive. We also want to see good survey data before people spray pesticides and appropriate economic thresholds. We see that certain sites might need more protection, watersheds, sensitive places and species. There's sort of minimal buffers on these. And we believe that better buffers would really help protect our water sources and protect these sensitive places and species. And in some places, staying out altogether. Some places just not appropriate for grasshopper sprays. We recognize that it's important to have some grasshopper suppression activity, but we really have to have a balance between protection and suppression. Finally, we'd like to have more information out there for the public. Right now, it's really hard to get this information. There's no public notification on public lands. We want to see that information shared. And so these are some of the reforms that we've been asking for. If you want to help us ask for these reforms, please get in touch with me. Sign up for an email newsletter. Sometimes we post action alerts, and you can find that at our website. Thank you to our supporters so much for helping us do this work. And if you want to go to our website, sign up for that newsletter, even become a donor, you can go to that link. I think you can find our email newsletter at possibly a different link, but if you do donate, you automatically get added to that list. So thank you, Joyce and Anna Gray, for inviting us into this. And at this point, I'm going to transfer to Lee.
I'm going to try and go pretty quickly. This photo is from about 2 weeks ago. I'll leave it to you to decide who the pests on the pollinator periphery are. Is it me? Is it the Mormon crickets? My name is Lee Murphy, and I'm calling this the Mormon cricket drifting summer for multiple reasons. First, because they're a mobile swarm, so I'm moving around, and second, because when they build up on the roadways, I did a small experiment with my truck, and I got a nickname locally as the cricket drifter. So let's get to it. This is the overview of the presentation. This is roughly the outline. I hope if you have questions, I know that we're supposed to reserve it to the end, but it's more important to me for this to be an opportunity to hear from everyone and to sort of be in dialogue with Sharon's wonderful presentation that's at a very high level around what pesticides do. But that my goal for this presentation is to also hear from all of you. So hoping to hear from you. My background is in chemical ecology. I worked for Dr. Nomi Pierce, who's a lepidopterist at Harvard. And I'm currently, I've got a thesis committee of a sociologist named Dr. Justin Farrell and an entomologist, formerly USDA, Dr. Gregory Sword at Texas A&M. And I spent most of my adult professional life, however, working with kids, looking at boogers under microscopes. And so I lost my ability to be afraid, that innate fear of the insects. Like I had to be very brave for the kids. I also had to be very brave to drive a bus in New York City. Hence this video. I have been spending a lot of time in Elko, Nevada, because I heard that's where they have a lot of Mormon crickets. And I've been piloting new methods with a lot of very intelligent collaborators on the ground and remotely on how to understand the movements of these migratory wouldn't even, that's a challengeable word. Are they migrating? Are they simply moving? That's the whole point. But I had some wingless angels and demons on each shoulder. Unlike locusts, they cannot fly, so these things crawl on their bellies in the hot sun, the many, many miles that they move. This is a meme. There are swear words on here, so apologies to the children, but a lot of the times I started in the world of bees and hymenopterans mainly around social behavior. And so I have to explain to people that these are not hymenopterans, they're orthopterans. And there's a whole society devoted to the orthopterans. And you should, if you're interested in grasshoppers, there are people who are very interested in grasshoppers to tell you lots of things, but this is roughly the sort of field we're dealing with Mormon crickets, which is, of course, again, a misnomer of sorts because they are katydids. I heard about them growing up because I am from Idaho, and they are considered sort of a Western pest, right? They have a range of the Intermountain West. I actually was galvanized to study them because I got this notification in my inbox. So I was born here in Colorado. I grew up here in Idaho. But I was living in Brooklyn, New York, and read the New York Times and thought, that's not a very nice thing to say about a city. Smelly crickets. So that's what galvanized me to jump into this. And this is where we're at. We're going to be studying and talking about this region of the world. Elko County. Shout out to Curtis, who I know is on this call. This is an insight. I thought maybe we should listen to the folks who are actually from that area. Like, what is your experience of the Mormon cricket outbreak? Even though I come from a social behavior and insects background, there's a whole set of social behaviors in humans that really changes the way pests move on the landscape, how they're treated, how they're controlled, how people feel about them. This is drone footage from a road in Wild Horse in Nevada. As you can see, the tire tracks, that's where they really swarm to where there's food. At different stages of their life, they have various nutrient deficiencies. So this was a quote from a person I spoke to in Shantytown in Nevada. They said they bubble on the ground like lava with legs. I thought that was a very good image. There's a option to rename them. There's the silly things floating around on the internet, like katydids of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I just thought that was interesting. This is called the Jello Belt, colloquially where I'm from, and it sort of overlaps with this USDA map. Just thought that was funny for you all to see. I've been conducting these experiments with them to understand their nutrient deficiencies and what they want to eat throughout their life cycle. I'm focusing mainly on this really interesting and very locally fun. Like, this is the fun thing to talk about in the bars. With ranchers and things, this is a good hook. The female during copulation mounts the male, which people get a kick out of, and then the male deposits something called a spermatophylax, which is basically a tissue plug to make sure that she can't remate. It's we're still learning what the purpose of this is, but I collect a bunch of them, make little spermatophylax kebabs, and then sort of feed them back to them in a controlled trial with various other diets, carbohydrates, proteins. And I'm building on the work of many other scientists with this particular experiment, but we're curious as to why other female Mormon crickets, given that they're so hungry, don't eat the spermatophylax of other Mormon crickets hanging out. They just kind of let them pass. So it's an interesting thing. They'll eat each other, but they sort of let these things fly. So we're trying to understand that mystery. That's one of the many mysteries of the species. This is a Mormon cricket female laying her eggs in a sandy patch. I've just noticed anecdotally that they usually like to lay their little clutches near succulents on roads or sort of otherwise disturbed patches where there is still some foliage. Not sure what that's about. That's what the eggs look like. They're like little rice grains, very delicious looking. This is a picture also from this outbreak this summer. I've been in mostly Elko County and Moffat County. We're doing some GIS work. I'm hoping to talk to anybody who's willing to chat with me about their experiences with Mormon crickets. And we're doing some pretty cool new methods of studying them that have never been done before. So it's complicated. We need to move faster, right? We're only at section 2. Okay, so I've seen there's some issues of lot of thoughts around what pest control means, but that is the actual name of a pest control pesticide, the Adios brand. But I want to know how best to reframe the cricket problem. Like it definitely is a problem for many people on a very personal level, on a federal level, on a state level, county level, every level. There seems to be like there's belly aching. Okay, uh, and this is sort of the myth. This is sort of like the crickets were the problem and the gulls saved us. And it's a part of mythologies that are like just local and powerful. So you can't fight that. You can't fight feelings really. It's hard to. So how do we go with the feelings? Some folks really were very innovative, and in Elko they held the annual cricket con. They called it the creature everyone loves to hate, and they brought everybody together. El Grillo was the burrito place that was serving up burritos. I made this funny poster, tried to talk to kids about Mormon crickets, and it was fun community banter about it, and a great time to share stories. Um, these are some of the plants they like to feed on. This is from an older presentation, but I think it's pretty interesting, the big difference. They can chew on those soft, little, delicate, lovely flowers, and then they also munch on big sagebrush. Like these crickets and people of the Great Basin are resilient. So that's important to know. Sorry for I forgot to trigger warn you about the giant carrion on the antelope and the rattlesnake. Apologies, I should have given you a trigger warning. But things eat it. Crickets, and the crickets eat them. That's the Wild Horse Dam. With a lot of crickets in the water. Apparently, the best place to fish is right near that area, right near the dam. It's usually the best area to fish, also because of the colder, deeper water. But folks swear by Mormon crickets as bait. So they're a part of big nutrient cycling things that folks haven't really quite studied, like Sharon mentioned. There's also, I think, a lot of sociocultural baggage that we need to unpack related to our relationship to pests and relationship to people, who I think this is an area of my study that I hope to dig into in the next coming weeks. There's a lot of narratives around the relationship between Indigenous peoples and Mormon crickets, but oftentimes written from the settlers' perspective. So it's a little more difficult to understand how and when these animals interacted with people before written narratives. But if anyone has any leads, I'd be very, very excited to know about them. I have a couple of objectives. There's a lot of problems related to the problem. You can see it as a problem. You can see it as a lot of different things. I'm focusing mainly on this insect communication band. Like how are the bands forming? Where are they going? How could we think about it a little bit differently? I also have been really interested in this economically and justice-informed management press side of things, and have been really lucky to connect with great tribal land managers and amazing ranchers and farmers, folks who care. And this is the big idea. What are the drivers of collective behavior in animal groups? Schools of fish move in this incredible way, murmurations of starlings. Mormon crickets, similarly, they're a little less sleek. Anabris, simplex, anabris from the Greek word abros, which is beautiful, and an meaning not, so not beautiful, and simplex being like the most boring shape. So they're not a beautiful creature, but they are an interesting creature. And they can be beautiful. There's some cute pictures of them. And some people make art about them. So this is from Rangeley, Colorado, a postcard from the Ace Hardware, I think, that a local artist made, that I am going to send around to family members. So my objective is to identify key factors driving the formation and social construction of the Mormon cricket bands. It's an enormous question. There's no possible way I'm going to answer it in my master's thesis, but I've enjoyed talking broadly to folks. I have a couple of hypotheses, and I have some new tools and tricks to study it. I think there's a whole other part of this, the formation of bands, related to the way we fragment the landscape, the way we understand our ethical obligations to invertebrates, and the ways we tell stories and think about ecological justice related to our management of animals in the natural world. So this is where the science fiction meets the dust and the duct tape. I taped a tiny 720 milligram camera to a Mormon cricket in the tradition of a long range of putting backpacks on bugs. Gregory Sword Pat Lorch, two of my mentors, put radio transmitters on the back of Mormon crickets. We're like, what about a camera? So we did that. It's
Stop seeing stuff.
Oh, maybe you're hearing the audio. I'm just yelling at my collaborator, Dr. Vishwanath Varma, who's in the image. You can see.
It sees you.
The cricket can see him. The outline. It's a very
make a
image,
sign.
but
Do
the
something, honey.
Is, the cameraman.
Put your hands up.
Video.
Put your hand up.
I'm embarrassed. I'm yelling. But yes, so you can see from the cricket's perspective. On the other hand, these folks are wild. They made a. Sorry, there's audio here. They made a virtual reality machine for Mormon crickets. They did this in locusts to understand the proximal mechanisms for why they maintain their collective movement direction, or what does what is the factor contributing to how they move around the world. So this is like a solar panel powered field operated like 3D printed VR machine, and I got to hang out with them, and they're my collaborators. They're incredibly brilliant folks. That's Dr. PPAN. I'm blanking on his last name right now. And Dr. Gregory Sword and Dr. Sharon, also blanking on his last name. I apologize. I can send a full resource list for all my collaborators, but they're brilliant scientists. Yes, here's the backpacks from Sword and All. This other part of it is not just, okay, so they make proximal decisions based on like individual actions around them, but what could we understand about their movement as a swarm? And nobody's ever used drones on Mormon crickets before, but we did, and this is super early data. This is like when I went out with my friend David, who has a drone pilot's license, and we filmed the crickets from 20 feet above and sent them to then Dr. Vishwanath like analyzed it. I was like, what? But these he turned every cricket in a swarm into a data point, and he can understand a little bit more how landscape factors like plants, potentially even soil profiles, topography, things like that on a certain given stretch of Mormon crickets moving, how they interact with the landscape, which I think is pretty cool. Very sci-fi. And these are the folks that are making it happen. I've been talking to everyone that I can. This is Pavan, Dr. Greg Sword, and Sir Sean. Then this is Clyde up in the right-hand corner, who's like basically my number one collaborator on the ground. He's around always. I was filming on his land quite a bit. He tells me whenever there's crickets in the area. He works, wakes up at like 5 a.m, works his land, works another job, comes back in the evening, talks to me about crickets, and he's been, 3 generations living in that valley. This is a couple of missionaries from Mormon LDS missionaries at the Cricket Con, and we had a great conversation about why Mormon crickets matter and sort of the idea of resilience in the face of adversity. And so talking to everyone has been great. And I think that my conclusion so far is that I don't have yet enough data. I'm going back to the field next week. I'd like very much to work with the Duck Valley Fish and Game Department. They had a very big outbreak near Owyhee and Mountain Home very recently. And they have been very open to collaboration. So I'm going to be working with Joey to think about what kind of questions actually matter to his team. And then to build some trust, because I am just a master's student and I am dropping in from the East Coast. I think it's important to always remember what it looks like when somebody with I guess maybe with a tiny camera shows up on your land. It's probably, this is a camera, it's spy cam immediately. So making sure that I continue to build trust is a big priority for me. And maybe we'll make the world's first Mormon cricket film documentary, and answer some big mysteries about this very interesting species that hopefully can be useful economically, ecologically to people. This is my thanks. This is the first ever Mormon cricket selfie. These cameras were developed by Dr. Vikram Meyer and Dr. Sawyer Fuller from the University of Washington. Hit that QR code if you want to see their amazing, cool research in action. And these are all of my funders, and thank yous to all of these folks. If you have any questions, if you want to like a long, way bigger Zotero data, but I'll give you my Zotero database. Yeah, and I wanted to thank specifically William Wessel and Dylan Tussey, who are both USDA folks who early on very much talked to me and gave me the lay of the land and have been nothing but cooperative and kind in sharing their data, especially also in Nevada, state entomologist Jeff Knight and Curtis Irwin. They created a really cool community map of Mormon cricket outbreaks and were pretty transparent, especially with me about treatments. I got to observe one, an aerial treatment, and run around with a couple folks in Elko County Natural Resources department. So everyone has been very helpful and willing and understanding that the humans are a part of the problem and also a part of the solution. So if you have any questions or if you want to see another weird little thing I made about Mormon crickets, that's a story map on ArcGIS, and this is my email.
You both, Lee and Sharon. These were great presentations. We do have some questions that we have been tracking. The first of which we already talked a little bit about this in the chat, but just to say it here, is there any information on which life stage grasshoppers or Mormon crickets contribute most to soil health, or is it relatively constant throughout their life cycle?
I assume that question is for me when I talked about nutrient cycling. Um, so uh, what happens when grasshoppers develop is that the eggs are usually laid in the fall and then they hatch out in the spring and they go through um, like set 5 instars, and those instars are a little bit bigger every time. They molt in between each instar, and like a skin like a snake sheds its skin. Same thing happens with invertebrates where they have to shed their exoskeleton before they can actually grow. And that's why that diflubenzuron really works, because that's the stage that it targets. Like if you can't shed your skin and grow a new skin, essentially, then you can't grow, and that's how they die. Um, they eat more as they grow. So that nutrient cycling is dependent really upon how much they eat and where they are. The nutrient cycling effect is more prominent, the way I understand it, in areas that are drier. Because these are the areas that otherwise would be sort of resistant to breaking down. There's just not as high a decomposition in dry areas. So I hope that answers the question. I think all life stages contribute, but the bigger the insect, the adults, the older instars are going to contribute more.
Thank you. Our next question is, what role does monitoring play in determining when spraying would occur? And is there an acceptable amount of damage to crops and vegetation before spraying becomes a necessity?
Yeah. Do you mind if I take that one too, Lee? Yeah, that's another really good question. And one thing to recognize, this was really put well by and he's not alive anymore, but he was a range scientist who worked on grasshoppers like back in the 80s and 90s. His name was Jerome Onsiger, and he says a certain amount of essentially insect consumption of forage has to be conceded. In other words, they're out there even when you don't see them, and they're eating even when it doesn't really bother you. So there's a certain amount of forage consumption that's always going to be in competition with, say, livestock or alfalfa production. And when they're, at low enough levels or really small, it really doesn't make a difference to your bottom line. Right now, the most commonly used threshold is 8 per square yard for grasshoppers. That was really meant to apply to adult grasshoppers. When they're nymphs, landscapes can accommodate more because they don't eat as much. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. But that's that threshold that is used. That doesn't mean that every time grasshoppers are more than 8 per square yard, there's a spray, but that is essentially where APHIS maps out the spots where they might do a treatment. So I hope that answers the question.
It does, thank you. Our next question, are grasshopper and or Mormon cricket infestations getting worse?
Lee, do you want to take that? What are the people you talking to say?
At the National Grasshopper Management Board meeting this year, I was a baby in the room, so I didn't really fully understand all the trends, but from what I understand, Mormon crickets they don't have a predictable periodicity of outbreak, but they do have sort of bigger years and bigger stretches of years than others. Grasshoppers seem to follow a similar boom and bust cycle. Predicting where they will outbreak is difficult. And there is data back to 2002 that a couple folks at the USDA are working on to think about how is it possible to forecast some of these outbreaks. There are grasshopper heat maps that are available on the USDA's website. There's no heat map available for the Mormon crickets, but it is related, from what I understand, the best way to think about where there will be outbreaks is to think about where they were laying their eggs. So that's Mormon crickets can't fly, right? So they're going to have to march within the range of their egg beds, and their hatching conditions depend mostly on precipitation of the preceding years. Other factors include ground temperature. Bob Strigley is a great, he publishes a lot of papers. I don't know if you want to dig through them, but he's working right now on Mormon cricket diapause, because Mormon crickets can stay underground as eggs, basically pausing, right? Their life, not life cycle, but they're in development underground until perfect local micro conditions. So they can, and that range has been, between 1 year, and Greg at the meeting said that, he has reason to believe that they can wait up to 27 years. I think he said 27 years at the meeting. But I think that most folks say like around 7. But it's up in the air. Do you have further things to add, Sharon?
No, I'm so glad you mentioned the diapause, because when you really think about it, like, could we wait out 27 years just, sleeping in our living room and then sort of emerge when we felt like ready to face the world again? I don't think so. So these are incredibly adaptive insects, and they'll outlive us on this planet. I have no doubt about that. There is a paper, at least one, there's probably others, that came out about climate change and whether grasshoppers might be predicted to be more prevalent, outbreaks more severe under warmer temperatures in the future. And it does look like that could happen, although there's still a lot of uncertainty. So time will tell.
Good to know. Thank you both. Our next kind of strand of questions here are about management, specifically for like your average gardener, I would say. So someone's curious about how many grasshoppers are eaten by mountain bluebirds and other birds local to the area. And then also wondering what is the best way to attract the birds that do feed heavily on grasshoppers.
I can jump in briefly with that. I don't necessarily have like how many, like some of those numbers that I showed you came out of published studies. I don't remember seeing published studies on mountain bluebird, was it Oriole? But like bluebirds are hole nesters. And so if you have a cavity nester, providing a bird house might be helpful to make sure that they come back year after year to your property. So those kinds of things, thinking about what the bird might need to fulfill its other needs, its nesting needs and stuff like that, having that diverse vegetation base so that when the grasshoppers are not there, they've got something else to eat that is, going to be hopefully pretty abundant on this other diverse base. Lee, I don't know if you've got something to add to that.
Well, I folks have said anecdotally that things like, again, I'm very Mormon cricket centric. Sorry to all the grasshopper folks, because they're very different. They're all orthopterans, but you're right, the dynamics are quite different. But that there's sort of remember that diagram from the biology textbook where you see the lynxes and the hares, and the hares will peak before the lynxes do. So it's kind of thinking through, you're getting a lot of that with the boom and bust of the grasshoppers as well, and the birds too. So maybe a bumper crop of grasshoppers might, increase the number of birds that are predators and increase their ability to provision their young. So no answer to that really, but except for that, I heard ground squirrels pop off, in the years after the Mormon cricket outbreaks.
Yeah, this is a really interesting thread, because there has been investigation into these areas with like a lot of different kinds of insects. These are not the only insects that boom and bust. It happens in forest ecosystems, and there's other cycles like this that you can see in nature, like the salmon in the Northwest, that have these huge, and it's called resource pulses. And so when you think about the problem, reframing it, I think part of that reframing has to take into account that this is a natural resource pulse. What does it mean to all these other wildlife? Because when you study resource pulses sort of like at a 30,000-foot level and look at a lot of different examples of those in nature, you do see these secondary effects, just exactly like you're talking about the hares and the lynx. So.
Awesome. That is super interesting. Our next question is about diatomaceous earth. Any use for it with grasshoppers?
I think I've heard people talk about it. I have not heard a lot about it. I would think that it wouldn't actually be very useful because it's usually more effective on soft-bodied insects. So yeah, I don't know a whole lot, but I wouldn't count on it.
Okay. And kind of onto that question, what are your thoughts on using molasses or any other things of the sort to raise BRIX levels that will increase resistance?
Yeah, I don't know about molasses and Brix levels, but what I can say is that molasses has sort of a mixed reputation. Some people say it works really well. Some people say it doesn't. You could try it and see. There's some YouTube videos and stuff on molasses traps. Um, so they might be something to consider, especially if you haven't like fenced off your garden in a way that makes it, basically that you're protecting it ahead of time. But you might not want to put all your eggs into that basket. So it might be good then to think about some of those other physical, like going out and collecting them, when the weather is cool in the morning. Yeah.
Somebody ranchers swear by for Mormon crickets. Yeah, but Dawn dish soap. They say
Mhm.
specifically Dawn. I don't know why. Maybe it's propaganda, but Dawn dish soap mixed with soapy water, and you spray it on them, and it sort of drowns them because they're not able to breathe through their little spiracles. Mormon crickets.
Yeah.
Mm. Nice. Our next question here is, does tilling the soil to attempt to break up egg patches for grasshoppers really help? And when is the best time to do it?
That is a method that is recommended as, one of, a variety of different strategies. It may be, something that can be done. And there's a lot of no-till agriculture out there. And so there's a lot of reasons to do that. But in some cases, this may be basically protecting egg beds. And so if tillage can be done, it's especially recommended for some croplands and things like that. The fall is the best time to do it because they're going to be laying their eggs in late summer, fall. So if you can do the tillage after they've laid their eggs, you're more likely to actually basically destroy the egg bags before they hatch out the next spring. And if you've got a garden, you can think about the same thing. Mulch is another potential way to protect the soil. That they might not be as easily able to dig down through the mulch in order to get down to the soil level where the eggs are going to be laid.
Yeah. And I will say, uh, uh, just around method, like localized methods, that at the National Grasshopper Management Board meeting, the folks who are at the extension colleges, extensions, and also folks agent APHIS in their their goal is also to help folks manage their pest issues, especially if they originate on public land. So I would also think about checking out some of those extensions colleges websites for kind of local, like, oh yeah, if you plant this particular thing, maybe you'll get best info from your region. So I put the Wyoming extension link there, but there's maybe you can link, there's a Colorado link in there too. So I know it's a bummer, but I've had good luck reaching out to folks whose emails are listed around the Grasshopper and Mormon cricket management, and they're usually pretty helpful. They'll have maybe a fact sheet or something, but like Sharon said, your tests are often maybe the first of their kind in your area.
Yeah, there's a lot of information from Extension in Colorado, so that's available online. You can find a variety of different resources. Yeah.
Great. And we have two questions left. Is that okay? I know we're a little bit over time here.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Mhm.
I believe this one is for Lee. Does AI have any role in the research you're doing?
Well, I learned recently that AI is kind of like from somebody on an airplane, of course, but they were like, AI is going to be the sort of base technology. It's going to be the ground floor for a lot of other technologies that are built on top of it, sort of like how we think of the internet now. For my specific research, is machine learning probably a part of what's going on and tracking those individual crickets in Dr. Vishwanath Varma's lab? Most certainly, some of his work is done in Python, and probably has some potentially AI help, but he is also himself like a coding genius. But for me, the I intend to, at least for the diet experiments where I'm feeding them spermatophores, to just simply go through the videos myself, click on the bugs. But when I figure out how to potentially automate it, I will do that. But that's an interesting question, and I think it's something everyone has to reckon with in their field right now. So thank you for your question.
We'll close out and we will send out those slides and the recording to everyone shortly. Thank you so much, Sharon and Lee. This was an amazing presentation. I think we all learned a lot, and thank you to everyone who joined today as well.
Thank you so much.